The book against Vigilantius St. Jerome, the Blessed of Stridon, Abstract AB. The short polemical treatise Book against Vigilantius was written by Blessed Jerome of Stridon in just one night in 406 AD against the Alexandrian priest Vigilantius in defense of monasticism and the veneration of martyrs. Vigilantius taught that martyrs and their relics should not be venerated, that prayers to saints were useless, and that some church customs were pagan superstitions. He called monastic poverty and hermetism idleness and a shameful flight, and he disapproved of the custom of sending alms to Jerusalem. Vigilantius also taught that all clergy, including bishops, should marry, calling celibacy heresy and chastity a breeding ground for debauchery. Blessed Jerome responds to each of these false teachings, seeing in this a revival of the teaching of Jovinian, condemned by the Church. The veneration of holy martyrs and their relics is sanctified by church tradition. It is necessary to distinguish between the worship due to God alone and the veneration given to martyrs. God fulfills the prayers of the saints during their lifetime, and he hears their prayers even more when they are with Christ. Despite the fact that the custom of lighting candles in churches was borrowed from the pagans, but for them it was dedicated to demons, and for Christians it is directed towards the veneration of the true God and the saints. All-night vigils which are held in churches dedicated to martyrs, as well as the Sunday Eucharist, in no way diminish the solemnity of the Easter Vigil. Almsgiving is pleasing to God. For example, the Apostle Paul made collections for the Jerusalem church. Chastity, fasting, and abstinence have incomparable superiority over licentiousness and luxury. Virginity and monasticism are pleasing to the Lord and are the destiny of the chosen few. Vigilantius, a native of Aquitaine, a priest according to Jerome, of little education, taught that 1. One should not venerate martyrs and their relics and hold vigils in churches over their remains. 2. That the prayers of the saints do not bring us any benefit. 3. That some church customs, especially the lighting of candles at the liturgy or during the reading of the gospel, are pagan superstitions, and that Alleluia should never be sung except at Easter. 4. That everyone can enjoy wealth and that renunciation of worldly things is not a virtue. Therefore he called monastic poverty and hermitage idleness and a shameful flight, and did not approve of and sometimes forbade the custom of sending alms to Jerusalem. 5. He taught that all clergy, not excluding bishops, should marry, and called celibacy a heresy and chastity a breeding ground for debauchery. Jerome responds to each of these false teachings in this book, which he says he dictated in the course of a single night. The book was written in 406. Many monsters have been born in this world. We read of centaurs and sirens, owls and vultures, Isaiah 13 and 35. Job, in his mysterious speech, depicts the Leviathan and Behemoth, Job 3 and 40. The fables of poets tell of Cerberus and the Stymphalidae, the Erymanthian boar and the Nemean lion, the chimera and the many-headed hydra. Virgil describes Cacus, Book 8. The three-headed Spanish Geryon is well known. Gaul alone had no monsters, but was always rich in strong and intelligent men. Suddenly Vigilantius, or rather Dormitantius, appeared waging war against the Spirit of Christ with an unclean spirit, denying the veneration of the tombs of martyrs, declaring that vigils should be condemned, that Alleluia should never be sung except on Easter, that abstinence is heresy, and that chastity is a breeding ground for debauchery. And just as Euphorbus, as they say, was reborn in Pythagoras, so the false teaching of Jovinian was resurrected in him, so that we are forced to respond to the devil's suggestions in both the one and the other. He is rightly told, O evil seed, prepare thy children to be slain by the sins of thy father. Isaiah 14:20. 21. Condemned by the authority of the Roman Church over Colchian fowls and swine's flesh, he did not so much give up as vomit. This Caliguratanian innkeeper, the mute Quintilian after the name of the place, mixes water with wine and, in keeping with his previous art, seeks to mingle the poison of his own unbelief with the Catholic faith, to degrade virginity, to arouse hatred of chastity, and to preach against the fasts of the saints at the feasts of the worldly. And while philosophizing over cups and feasting on pies, he delights in the melody of psalms, so that only at feasts does he deign to listen to the songs of David and Asaph and the sons of Horaeus. Unable to restrain myself from being tormented by this, more with grief than with laughter, I cannot remain deaf to this insult to the apostles and martyrs. Oh shame! They say he has bishops who share his crime, if one can even call those bishops who ordain deacons only if they first marry, not trusting the chastity of any unmarried person, even while proving how sacredly those who are universally suspected of evil live, and who distribute the sacraments of Christ only if they see the wives of clergymen, pregnant and children weeping in their mother's arms. What will the churches of the East do? What will the churches of Egypt and the Apostolic See do, who receive clerics who are either virgins or celibates, or those who, if they have wives, cease to be husbands? This is what Dormitantius taught, loosening the bridle of lust and, with his admonitions, the natural ardor of the flesh, which flares up especially in youth, aggravating or better satisfying it through intercourse with women, so that there would be nothing in which we would differ from swine, from dumb animals, from horses, of which it is written, "You have become horses frenzied by women, every one neighing to his neighbor's wife." Jer. 5:8. This is the same as what the Holy Spirit says through David. Do not be like the horse and the steed, which have no understanding. 32:9. And again about Dormitantius and his accomplices. With reins and bridle you will restrain their jaws, those who do not come near you. Ibid. But it is time, presenting his own words, to attempt to respond to each of his propositions. For it may happen that again a malicious commentator will say that I have invented the matter in order to respond to it with rhetorical declamation, like the one I wrote about in Gaul, about which a mother and daughter disagreed. The culprits of this discourse of mine are the holy presbyters, Riparius and Desiderius, who write that their parishes, neighboring his, are contaminated by his teaching, and sent, through brother Sicinius, the books he vomited in his sleep while drunk. And they assert that some have been found who, indulging their vices, sympathize with his blasphemies, although he is ignorant and unlearned, both in expressions, in information, and in language, and cannot even defend what is true. But for worldly people and women burdened with sins, always learning and never reaching the knowledge of the truth, I will answer his nonsense with one reasoning, so as not to seem to neglect the message of the holy men who asked me to do this. Truly, he is true to his race, for descended from the seed of robbers and vagabonds whom, Consul Strab, Book 5. Pompey, after pacifying Spain, hastening to return in triumph, drove from the Pyrenean mountains and gathered into one city, from which they received the city as a convent. He still plunders the Church of God, and, descending from the Vectonian, Arabasian, and Celtiberian mountains, attacks the churches of Gaul, and bears not the banner of the cross, but the sign of the devil. This same Pompey did the same in the countries of the east, so that, having defeated the Cilician and Isaurian pirates and robbers between Cilicia and Isauria, he could build a city in his own name. But this city still preserves the institutions of its ancestors, and no Dormitantius has appeared in it. The Gauls tolerate their natural enemy and allow a man who is mad and in need of the Hippocratic chains to sit in the church, a man who, among other blasphemous words, says, "Why do you need not only to honor with such reverence, but also to worship I know not what, which you venerate in a small vessel you carry with you?" And again in the same book, "Why do you venerate dust wrapped in a towel with reverence?" And further, we see that in accordance with the pagan rite, under the pretext of piety, it has been introduced into churches, even in the sunlight, to light a multitude of candles. Everywhere, too, they worship with kisses, some powder, I know not what, in a small, precious vessel wrapped in a towel. Such people give great honor to the most blessed martyrs, whom, they think, need to be illuminated, whereas they are illuminated by the Lamb sitting on the throne with all the splendor of his majesty. For who, O foolish one, ever worshipped martyrs, as God martyris adoravit? Whoever considered a man to be God? When Paul and Barnabas were considered by the Lycaonians to be Jupiter and Mercury, Acts 14, and when they wanted to offer them sacrifice, did they not rend their clothes and say they were men? Not because they were no better than the long-dead men Jupiter and Mercury, but so that, through pagan error, the honor due to God would not be given to them. We read this also of Peter, who lifted up Cornelius, who wanted to worship him, and said, "Rise up, and I myself am a man." Acts 10:25. Moreover, you dare to say that unknown thing which you venerate in a small vessel you carry with you. I want to know what this unknown thing is. Say it more clearly so as to blaspheme with complete freedom. Powder of some unknown kind in a small, precious vessel wrapped in a towel. He regrets that the remains of martyrs are covered with precious shrouds, and not wrapped in rags or sackcloth, or thrown onto a dunghill, so that the veneration of a drunken and sleepy Vigilantius alone may be rendered. So, are we blasphemers if we enter the basilicas of the apostles? Was Emperor Constantine I a blasphemer who transferred the holy relics of Andrew, Luke, and Timothy to Constantinople, in whose presence demons roar and those living in Vigilantius confess that they sense their presence? Shouldn't the current Augustus Arcadius also be considered a blasphemer, who, long afterward, transferred the relics of blessed Samuel from Judea to Thrace? Shouldn't all bishops be considered not only blasphemers, but also fools who carry the most insignificant thing and decayed dust in silk and a golden vessel? Are not the people of all the churches foolish who met the holy relics and received them with such joy, as if they were seeing a prophet actually present and alive, when crowds came from Palestine to Chalcedon and with one voice sang praises to Christ? After all, they worshipped Samuel, not Christ, whose prophet and Levite Samuel was. You consider him dead, and therefore you blaspheme? Read the Gospel. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Matthew 22:32. So, if they are alive, they are not confined in what you consider an honorable prison. For you say that the souls of the apostles and martyrs are enthroned either in Abraham's bosom or in a place of refreshment or beneath the altar of God, and cannot manifest their presence at their tombs or wherever they wish. They are of senatorial rank, and therefore are not confined in the foulest dungeon among murderers, but in free and honorable confinement on the happy islands and in the Elysian fields. Will you lay down laws for God? Will you impose chains on the apostles, so that they, of whom it is written, they shall follow the Lamb wherever he goes? Reverend 14. 4 will be kept in confinement until the day of judgment, and will not be with their Lord. If the Lamb is everywhere, then one must think that they, who are with the Lamb, are also everywhere. And while the devil and demons wander throughout the whole world and appear everywhere with extraordinary rapidity, can the martyrs, after the shedding of their blood, be shut up under the lid of the tomb and not be able to come out? You say in your book that while we are alive we can pray for one another, but after death no one's prayer for another can be heard, especially because the martyrs who prayed for vengeance for their blood could not obtain this. Reverend 6:9. If the apostles and martyrs, while still united to the body, when they must still take care of themselves, can pray for others, how much more so after the crowns of victories and triumphs? One man, Moses, asks God for forgiveness for 600,000 who are able to bear arms. Exodus 32, Acts 7, and Stephen, an imitator of his Lord and the first martyr in Christ, prays for the forgiveness of his persecutors. Will they have less power after they have been with Christ? The Apostle Paul says that he was given 276 souls who were with him on the ship. Will he, after being separated from Christ, close his mouth and not be able to utter a word for those who throughout the world have believed his gospel? And will the living dog of Vigilantius be better than this dead lion? Ecclesiastes 9. For I could justly quote this from Ecclesiastes if I acknowledged Paul as dead in the spirit. Finally, the saints are not called dead, but asleep. Therefore Lazarus, who was to rise again, is called asleep, John 11, and the apostle forbids the Thessalonians to mourn for the dead. You sleep while awake and write while sleepy, and you present me with an apocryphal book, which, under the name of Ezra, is read by you and those like you, in which it is written that after death no one dares to pray for others. I have never read this book, for what need is there to take up something that the church does not accept? Perhaps you can point me to Balsam and Barbel and the treasure of Mainz and the ridiculous name of Loisibor. Since you live at the foot of the Pyrenees and akin to Iberia, follow the incredible inventions of Basilides, the ancient heretic, and his ignorant teachings, and present what is condemned by the authority of the entire world. For in your commentary, as if to support your own cause, you take from Solomon testimony that Solomon never wrote, so that, having another Ezra, you also have another Solomon. If you like, then read the fictitious revelations of all the patriarchs and prophets, and having studied them, recite them at the women's looms or offer them for reading in your taverns. The more convenient way to attract the ignorant rabble to drunkenness with this nonsense. We light candles not in the clear light, as you falsely slander, but in order to moderate the darkness of the night, and to stay awake until daylight, lest we sleep blind in the darkness with you. If some, through ignorance, imperitium, and the simplicity of worldly people, or especially pious women, of whom it is truly said, I testify that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Rome 10:2. Do this out of reverence for the martyrs. What do you lose by this? Even the apostles once argued that the ointment was being wasted, but they were rebuked by the Lord. Mark 26. Mark 14. For neither did Christ need ointment, nor do the martyrs need candlelight. Nevertheless, that woman did this in honor of Christ, and the good feeling of her intention is accepted. And those who light candles have a reward according to their faith, according to the apostles' words, that each man abound in his own understanding. Rome 14:5. Do you call such people idolaters? I do not deny that all of us who believe in Christ have come from the error of idolatry. For we are not born Christians, but are reborn. And since we once revered idols, should we not now revere God, lest it seem that we honor him with the same veneration as idols? That was done to idols, and therefore should be rejected. This is done to martyrs, and therefore should be accepted. For even without the relics of martyrs in all the churches of the East, when the gospel is to be read, lamps are lit, even in the sunlight, certainly not to drive away the darkness, but as a sign of joy. That is why the virgins of the gospel always have their lamps lit, Matthew 25. And the apostles are told, "Let your loins be girded and your lamps burning." Luke 12:35. And of John the Baptist, he was a shining and burning light, John 5:35, so that under the image of material, light would be represented, that light of which we read in the Psalter, "Your law is a lamp to my feet and a light to my paths," Psalm 119, 105. So is the Bishop of Rome wrong who, while we consider it on the venerable bones, you consider it on the paltry ashes of the dead Peter and Paul, offers sacrifices to the Lord, and considers their tombs to be the altars of Christ? And are the bishops of not only one city but of the entire world mistaken who, disdaining the innkeeper, Vigilantius, enter the basilicas of the dead, where the most paltry dust and ashes lie wrapped in a towel of unknown origin, so vile that they defile everything, just as the tombs of the Pharisees are whitewashed on the outside, while inside, in your opinion, everything is unclean, stinking, and foul? And then, spewing vile filth from the pit of his heart, he dares to say, "Then the souls of martyrs love their mortal remains and hover around them, always present, so that if some sinner comes, he will not be deprived of the opportunity to hear him." O monster, worthy of being cast to the ends of the earth! You mock the relics of martyrs, and with Eunomius, the founder of this heresy, slander the churches of Christ, and are not afraid of such a community, so as to speak against us the same things he says against the church. For none of his followers enter the basilicas of the apostles and martyrs, that is, to venerate the dead Eunomius, whose books they consider more authoritative than the Gospels, and believe they see the light of truth in him, just as other heresies argue that the Paraclete appeared in Montana and say that Menes was the Paraclete himself. Against your heresy, which has long risen against the Church, lest you boast in this too as the inventor of a new crime, Tertullian, a most learned man, writes a remarkable book, to which he very appropriately gives the title Scopiacum, for this heresy, which in ancient times was called the Cainite heresy, pours its poison into the body of the Church through a great wound. Long dead and even buried, it has now been resurrected by Dormitantius. I am surprised that you do not say that martyrdom should not be sought at all, for God, who does not require the blood of goats and calves, certainly does not require the blood of men. Whether you have said this, or even if you have not, you can be considered to have said it. For by proving that the relics of martyrs must be despised, you forbid the shedding of blood which is unworthy of any veneration. I briefly discussed the vigils and all-night services often held in the martyrs' basilicas in another letter written 2 years ago to Saint Reparius the priest. And if you think that they should not be allowed because they seem to be too often celebrating the Passover, then for that reason sacrifices to Christ should not be offered on Sunday, lest the Passover of the Lord's resurrection be too often celebrated and not have not one but many Passovers. And the abuse of youths and vile women, often observed at night, should not be imputed to pious people. For something similar is often observed even at Easter vigils, and yet the guilt of a few does not serve to disparage piety. A few who, even without vigils, can sin in their own or in others' homes. The faith of the apostles was not destroyed by the betrayal of Judas. Therefore, our vigils will not be destroyed by the evil vigils of others. Moreover, those who sleep to lust are forced to keep vigil for chastity. For what is good if done once cannot be bad if done often, or if any crime should be avoided. It is not criminal because it is done often, but because it is done at least once. Therefore, let us not keep vigils on the days of Passover, lest the long unsatisfied lusts of fornicators be fulfilled, lest the wife find an opportunity to sin, lest she be left unattended to her husband's house. I cannot trace all that the holy priest's epistle contains. I will only present a few from his little books. He presents evidence against the signs and wonders performed in the martyrs' basilicas, saying that they are beneficial for unbelievers, not for believers, as if the question now is for whom they are performed, and not by what power they are performed. Let signs be performed for unbelievers, so that they, who wish to believe the word and teaching, may be brought to faith by signs, and the Lord may work signs for unbelievers. But the fact that they were unbelievers should not disparage the signs. On the contrary, they should be worthy of great admiration, for they were so powerful that they astonished and aroused minds to faith. So I do not want you to tell me that signs serve for unbelievers, but answer me how such signs and powers are manifested in the most insignificant dust and ashes, who knows what kind. I know, most unfortunate of mortals, what you are worried about, what you fear. The unclean spirit that prompts you to write this has often been tormented by this most insignificant dust, and even now suffers torment, and the one that apparently suffers defeat in you confesses to others. Perhaps, however, you, following the custom of the pagans and impious Porphyry and Eunomius, invent that these are the spells of demons, and that the demons do not truly cry out, but only feign their torment. I give you this advice. Go to the basilicas of the martyrs, and someday you will be cleansed. There you will find many of your accomplices, and you will be burned not by the candles of the martyrs, whom you do not like, but by an invisible flame, and then you will admit what you now deny. And you who speak in Vigilantia will openly proclaim your name, that you are either Mercury through greed and money, or, according to Plautus's Amphitryon, Nocturnus during his sleep, whom Jupiter spent 2 nights in adultery with Alcmene, so that the great Hercules was born, or certainly Father Bacchus through drunkenness and a cup hanging from his shoulders, with an ever-red face, foam on his lips, and unbridled curses. Therefore, when a sudden earthquake in the middle of the night awakened everyone in this province, you, the most prudent and wisest of mortals, prayed naked and presented to us Adam and Eve from paradise. Only they, when their eyes were opened, were ashamed to see themselves naked and covered their fleshy limbs with tree leaves. But you, naked in both clothing and faith, struck by sudden terror and somewhat overcome by the intoxication of the night, exposed the fleshy part of your body to the eyes of the saints and displayed your wit. Such are the adversaries the Church has. Such warriors fight against the blood of martyrs. Such orators thunder against the apostles, or rather such mad dogs bark against the disciples of Christ. I confess my fear, lest it somehow stem from superstition. When I am angry or have some evil thought in my mind, and a nocturnal vision deceives me, then I dare not enter the basilicas, so I tremble in body and spirit. You may laugh and ridicule this as the ravings of women. I am not ashamed of a faith similar to that of those who were the first to see the risen Lord, who were sent to the apostles, who, as the mother of the Lord Savior, are entrusted to the holy apostles. You vomit with the people of the world, but I will fast with women, or rather with pious men who prefer chastity to appearance, and with lips pale from abstinence display the chastity of Christ. You, it seems, are also concerned that, if abstinence, sobriety, and fasting were to increase among the Gauls, your taverns would lose their income, and you would lose the opportunity to spend the entire night observing vigils against the devil and indulging in drunken revelry. Furthermore, the same letter informed me that, contrary to the teaching of the Apostle Paul, and even of Peter, John, and James, who gave Paul the right hands of fellowship and commanded them to remember the poor, you forbid sending certain donations to Jerusalem for the saints' needs. Of course, if I were to respond to this, you would immediately bark that I am defending my own cause, since you have rewarded everyone so generously that if you had not come to Jerusalem and distributed your own or your patrons' money, we would all have perished of hunger. I say what the Apostle Paul says in almost all his epistles, and instructs the churches of the Gentiles, that on one of the Sabbaths, that is, on Sunday, all should bring offerings which should be sent to Jerusalem for the needs of the saints, either through his disciples or through those whom he himself appoints, and, if convenient, either sends or delivers what has been collected. And in the Acts of the Apostles, he says to Felix, the governor, "After many years I came to Jerusalem to give alms to my people and offerings, in which they found me purified in the church." Acts 24, 17, 18. Could he really not share what he had received from others in another part of the world, and in churches which, just emerging, he instructed with his faith? But he desired to give to the poor of the holy places, to the poor who, having left their possessions for Christ's sake, turned their whole mind to the service of Christ. It would be a long task if I were to now unpack from all his epistles all the testimonies in which he speaks, and with all his mind urges that aid be sent to the believers in Jerusalem and the holy places, not for greed but for assistance, not for the accumulation of wealth, but to support the weakness of the body and to avoid cold and hunger. In Judea, even to this day, this custom persists, not only among us, but also among the Jews, that those who meditate in the law of the Lord day and night, and who have no father on earth except God, partake of the offerings of the synagogues and of the whole world, that is, in a balanced manner, not so that some are relieved and others burdened, but that the abundance of one should supply the deficiency of the other. 1 Cor 8:13. You will answer that everyone can do this in their own country, and that there will be no shortage of poor who could be supported by church donations. And we do not deny that aid should be given to all the poor, even to Jews and Samaritans, if such generosity is to be demonstrated. But the apostle teaches that, while almsgiving is due to all, it is especially necessary for those who are close to the faith gal. 6 of whom the Savior also said in the Gospel, "Make yourselves friends from the mammon of unrighteousness, that they may receive you into everlasting shelters." Luke 16:9. Can those beggars beneath whose rags and filth of body unbridled lust reign really have eternal abodes, those poor who have neither present nor future abodes? For blessed are not simply the poor, but the poor in spirit, of whom it is written, "Blessed is he who understands the poor and needy. In the evil day the Lord will deliver him." Psalm 41. To help the poor of the crowd, not reason but almsgiving is needed. The holy poor possess the blessedness of reason. One must give to him who is ashamed to receive, and when he takes he grieves, reaps the bodily, but sows the spiritual. And if he proves that those who enjoy their possessions and gradually distribute the fruits of their acquisitions to the poor do better than those who, having sold their possessions, give everything at once, then his answer will not come from me but from the Lord. If you want to be perfect, go sell all that you have and give to the poor, and come follow me. Matthew 19:21. He speaks to the one who desires to be perfect, and who, with the apostles, leaves father, ship, and nets. The degree you praise is the second or third. We too accept it, knowing, however, that the first must be preferred to the second and third. And you must not intimidate the monks in their struggle with your caustic tongue and fierce attacks, the monks about whom you rant and rave. If everyone confines themselves and lives in the desert, who will serve in the churches? Who will win the people of this world for God? Who will convert sinners to virtue? For by this reasoning, if everyone along with you is foolish, who will be wise? And virginity cannot be approved. For if everyone is a virgin, there will be no marriage, the human race will perish, children will not cry in their cradles, midwives will be beggars without earnings, and Vigilantius will lie alone and hunched over in the most severe shivering on his bed. Virtue is rare and not sought after by many. And oh, if only everyone were like the few of whom it is said, "Many are called, but few are chosen." Matthew 20:16-22. 14. Then let there be prisons. A monk's duty is not to teach, but to weep. He mourns either himself or the world, and fearfully awaits the coming of the Lord. Knowing his own weakness and the frail vessel he carries, he fears stumbling, lest he strike and crush it, lest it be broken. Therefore he avoids the gaze of women, especially young ones, and is so concerned with purity that he fears even what is harmless. Why, you say, do you go into the desert? Because to avoid hearing you, to avoid seeing you, to avoid being inflamed by your fury, to avoid enduring your attacks, to avoid being captivated by the eye of a harlot, to avoid being lured into criminal embraces by a beautiful appearance. You will answer, "This is not war but flight. Stand in line, resist the enemy fully armed, so that after victory you may receive a crown." I confess my weakness. I do not want to fight in the hope of victory, lest I ever lose the victory. If I flee, I will escape the sword. If I stand, then I must either conquer or fall. And what need is there to abandon what is true and pursue the unfaithful? One must flee death whether with a shield or with one's feet. You who fight can both be defeated and conquer. When I flee, I do not conquer by fleeing. But then I flee lest I be overcome. It is not at all safe to sleep next to a snake. It may happen that it will not bite me, but it may happen that someday it will. We call them mothers, sisters, and daughters, and we are not ashamed to darken holy names with our vices. What does a monk do in women's cells? What do solitary and frequent conversations mean, and eyes that avoid intermediaries? Holy love has no intolerance. What was said about lust can also be applied to greed and all the vices that are alienated by the desert. This is why we avoid the crowds of cities, so as not to be compelled to do what is impelled not so much by nature as by free will. This, as I said at the request of the holy presbyters, I dictated in a single night session, since Brother Sicinius was in great haste and eager to depart for Egypt to assist the saints. Otherwise, the subject of the discourse, which had aroused more indignation than the abundance of evidence, would have been clearly debased. And if Vigilantius should again remain awake, slandering me, and, with the same blasphemous lips with which he blasphemed the apostles and martyrs, should he dare to revile me, then I will remain awake not only for a brief discourse, but for the entire night, for him and his accomplices, or rather, for the disciples and teachers who, if they cannot see the swollen bellies of their wives, consider their husbands unworthy of serving Christ. Notes. 1. Vigilantius awake. Jerome ironically renames him Vigilantius, sleeping drowsy. 2. When reading this and similar testimonies of Blessed Jerome, one should not forget that he was a most zealous defender of virginity and an enemy of married life, sometimes to the extreme. Perhaps his insufficient familiarity with the Eastern Church was the reason for this testimony of Jerome, which is at odds with history. 3 convenialians from different places. 4. Perhaps Jerome means here the book called Patriarchae, indicated in the synopsis of Athanasius, and in the rule of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Nicephorus. Source: Works of Blessed Jerome of Stridon, 1880 to 1903. Library of Works of the Holy Fathers and Teachers of the Western Church. Part 4. Kiev, Printing House, Eat Kara, 1880. 365 p. Book Against Vigilantism, 293, 310 p.